Joining me now is longtime Democratic strategist James Carville. It's good to see you. I wanted to start, I mean, we've talked about this before, and you've said consistently that Biden really shouldn't focus on this. His campaign shouldn't focus on the trials. The campaign strategists, I think, agree with you, aside from a little fun they have on social media. Do you think, just given what polls say, that any of that changes in your view if Trump is convicted? We don't know what's going to happen, but if he's convicted.
Probably. I mean, I think this is a conscientious jury. I think we don't need to speculate. In another week or so, 10 days, we're going to have an answer. And that's going to, you know, the jury's going to be interviewed, assuming if they have a conviction. They're going to interview them. They're going to talk about it. They're going to talk about the evidence. They're not paying attention to all of the surrounding noise. According to the report I just listened to right up on your show, said that they're very engaged jurors. They're paying very close attention. The judge is going to give them instructions. And I've just always been a big believer in our jury system. And whatever verdict they come up with is the verdict that I'm going to believe. But right now, there's nothing I can do about it. One way or another.
And we don't know how they'll decide. That's how it works. But if they decide he's convicted, we don't know if they will. Should the Biden team change their strategy, or you think they should stay full course not talking about the trials?
Well, one thing to remember, Jen, when you're convicted of a felony, your whole life changes. He's got to be processed. They might take his passport away from him. They could limit his travel. I don't think they'll put him right in jail, but his life is going to change. And I don't know how we could put another log on this fire. It's raging. It's being covered everywhere. I don't know how much people care about it, but no, I completely agree with the White House strategy. Just stay out of it. There's nothing to be gained here. Talk about reproductive rights. Talk about expanding health care. Talk about prescription drug price capping. Talk about the minimum wage. Talk about raising taxes on incomes over 400,000 people. These are all inherent popular positions that the president takes. Why talk about this guy now is 31,416 lies? Every day he lies. So I'm 100% behind their strategy. That no kerosene and no logs on this fire. It's raging out of control. And if he's convicted, you're going to have filing for appeal. You're going to have all kinds of things that are going to keep this story alive.
Yeah, no kerosene needed, I guess, to your point. The kerosene's happening. So let me ask you, let me ask you a question. I've been on a book tour, and I've talked to a lot of people out there, and the question people always ask me is about how, of course, they're Democrats and independents who ask me this, but how on earth is it possible that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are tied in the polls, given everything? What should I be saying? What do you say to people who ask you that question?
I'm trying to affect the outcome of the election. I can't rationalize things. I do know this. If the president talks about the Supreme Court, talks about taking rights away from people, talks about capping the price of prescription drugs, talks about the minimum wage, talks about the raising the taxes, he's going to do better. But I can't explain that 42% of American people think January 6th was a tourist visit. I mean, it's frustrating. It is, but I can't change that. You got to stay focused on reinforcing your support with your own voters and expanding that into other people. And by the way, it's a lot of noise. Trump, he was getting 22% were voting for Nikki Haley in Nebraska and Indiana in closed Republican primaries. I mean, there's a tendency, I think, Jen, and you know this from your time in the White House, to always focus on Dems in disarray and Dems have problems. Why are Dems doing better? Well, it's not like they're doing all that great. And they got crazy candidates all over the country. Have you taken a look at the Arizona Republican Party lately? So, yes, I am, I don't say frustrated, and I do think the president has to deal, the age issue is suffocating him. And he needs to bring up that he's only 4 years older than Trump, and Trump had his goons steal his medical records out of his internist office in January 2017. So I've released all my medical records. Why don't you release the records that you had Keith Schiller steal from your internist? I mean, he's got to turn that around and need to quit arguing and complaining about the Times covering his age and the polling is no good. That's a waste of time. Don't do that. Talk about how you're going to change people's lives and make it better, and how you building a record to build on, and you understand cost of living, and you understand what families are going through. High insurance rates. It's pedestrian, but it's the stuff that wins elections.
Let me ask you, I mean, you've said this before, and this really struck a nerve with me, and I think with a lot of people. It's like there's so many negatives about Trump. It's hard to figure out for some people out there who want Biden to win or don't want Trump to win what the best negative is. I mean, Biden did what I thought was a good event in Wisconsin, where he went to Foxconn, where Trump had promised jobs, didn't deliver on the jobs. What do you think the best negative is? What's your gut on that?
Well, what I'd like from the White House is some guidance, some line of attack that they're going to unleash, because, come on, they polled him twice a week. And I've said that attacking Trump is like a mosquito in a nudist colony. I mean, there's just there's so much rightness to land on, but you have to pick one. And I'm not getting any guidance, on what is the thing that about Trump. Was it the mismanagement of the pandemic? Was it criminality on January 6th? It's the ongoing criminality. It is the fact that he's pulling for Russia. Is the fact that he publicly wants to destroy NATO? I don't know, but when there's so many, your cup runneth over, and you can't drink anything out of it. So we do need some real focus on, hey, guys, this is the 2 or 3 things that matter the most to people. I suspect that cutting taxes for people over $400,000 is a good one. He's called for cutting Social Security and Medicare, and it's golden. We just need to block and tackle. We don't need to run triple reverses here.